Well, we're in a new Sunday school lesson there. Can you hear me there? We're in a new Sunday school lesson here, and did you see the title of the lesson? Egypt to Canaan, Part 1, From Egypt to Sinai. And so that's what we're going to be studying this quarterly for 13 weeks. And if they go by as fast as the last 13 weeks, why, my prediction is it'll probably go faster than the last 13 weeks. Seems like they usually do. But anyway, from Egypt to Canaan. Think back for a moment. Did you remember how Jacob, or Israel, remember his name was changed to Israel, and his family moved to Egypt during the 7 years of famine? Remember that? That's how they got down there. You remember Joseph was sold down there? Oh, and by the way, Joseph was the son of Jacob, which was the son of Isaac. Am I telling you right now? Jacob and Isaac, okay. Isaac was the son of Abraham. Who was Joseph sold to? The Ishmaelites. The Midianites had bought him, and which was Ishmaelite and the Midianites was two very closely related people. But if you'll go back to them, that was the son of Abraham also. So cousins was buying cousins is really what happened there, and selling brothers was selling brothers to cousins is kind of what it was. It was close there, and so and then how Joseph wound up, and we studied that I think last quarterly or the quarterly before. How Joseph was sold into Egypt. So that's how they all got there. Do you remember the beautiful story of how God worked throughout the lifetime of Joseph? That poor little old feller went through a lot. And I said that many a time when we were going through that. Overcoming all odds in good times and bad times. And it seemed like the bad times outweighed the good times quite a little bit. That was under the rule of a friendly Pharaoh who welcomed Joseph's family into Egypt. Now, fast forwarding several generations, the 70 souls that entered Egypt under the rule of the friendly Pharaoh all died, and their descendants have now multiplied tremendously. The land was filled with them. A new Pharaoh that is anything but friendly is now in charge, and he is fearful, and the Israelites, he is fearful that the Israelites would join forces with Egypt's enemies and fight against Egypt if Egypt ever came under an attack. That's what he was afraid of. This 70 souls multiplied into a lot of people. It was a big nation now of Israelites, and this was over several hundred years. 300 to 400 years is what this consisted of. So the Pharaoh was seeing a little problem here that was starting to arise that could be a problem, that could turn into a big problem, is what he's saying there. Therefore, this Pharaoh begins to afflict and restrict the Israelites to an effort to keeping them from multiplying so much. Satan is not a friendly taskmaster. God uses Israel's plight in Egypt to teach how Satan brings the bondage of sin upon those under his control. How does people become slaves? How does people become slaves? Well, some of them are born into slavery. Some of them are tricked into slavery. Some of them are captured and forced into slavery. And then there's some that become slaves on their own. Now, I thought of them 4 different ways, and there may be other ways of how people can become slaves, but I thought of 4 different ways of how people can become slaves to other people. And you have to have a party that is willing to put such people in slavery also, or it don't work. So there's several different ways. Now, Joseph was sold down there against his will, but then his family came on their own will, didn't they? Coming down there. And so, that's it's just something that I kind of wanted to point out to you at what happens here. God uses Israel's plight in Egypt to teach how Satan brings the bondage of sin upon those under his control. However, God always provides a way of escape. Satan had us under control, had us enslaved, and had us under his thumb that we could not move about, do anything without him leading and guiding us and putting us into even more deeper trouble. But yet there was a way out, and the way out was through Jesus Christ. However, God always provides a way of escape. Watch for the way God works in each lesson to accomplish his purpose of delivering his people from bondage. So that's kind of a prelogue of what our lessons is all about. Now, the title of our lesson today that we're going to be studying is Israel Enslaved in Egypt. Let's look at our memory verse there. Jesus answered them, saying, Verily, verily, surely, surely, I say unto you, whosoever committeth sin is the servant of sin.
That's right.
Sin is like slavery. Jesus said, whosoever committeth sin, whoever sins, is the servant of sin. The pleasures of sin last for a season, and then you pay for it. One way or another, you have to pay for it then. Sinners are not free. They never are free. They think they are, but if they only knew what freedom really was. Back in the early 1800s and when slavery was running rapid at that time, the African Americans didn't really know what freedom was really like. They were under slavery. Almost the whole population of the African Americans was under slavery. And they had no idea what freedom was really like. And then after they won their freedom in 1865 then, they really wasn't really free. They had a lot of obstacles to overcome. The white people wouldn't buy from them. If they had a business, they wouldn't buy from them. And but when God releases us from slavery, buys us back, we're free right then.
True.
It's altogether different than what it was back then. We are free, and we are free indeed. And it's like day and night between one of the other. Sinners are not free. Sin binds them. It makes them do things they should not and really do not want to do. Remember what Paul said in one of his epistles? Sin revived, and that's the day that I died is when I realized what sin was. And he says, what I wanted to do, I couldn't do. And what I didn't want to do, that's what I did. And that's what he's talking about here. The devil had him so engraved and bonded into sin that he was more or less just forced to do that. That's what slavery is. You're forced to do what you're commanded to do. And so, that's exactly how it works. Sin forms habits that are very, very hard to break. Sin brings trouble, sorrow, and death. Leave it like it is, and that's what you got to look forward to. That's what you got to look forward to. Sinners are slaves. Satan is their master. And he will not care how low he drags you down. No. He will not care about your life. He will not care about how miserable you are. He will just keep being a tough taskmaker. Right. And if we will think, that's kind of what the Egyptians did to the Israelites. It didn't matter to them. Their lives didn't mean a whole lot to them. If somebody got killed or in the line of work or something, they kick him off to the side and grab up another one and you got to fill his job now, or you got to get the guy next to him says, well, you got to take care of his work now too, And so, life did not mean much to the Egyptians. The Israelites' life did not mean much to the Egyptians, is what I was talking about. As the Israelites were slaved in Egypt under Pharaoh, so sinners are slaved in sin under Satan. See the contracts there? The type and antitype kind of is what he's talking about. Israel's slavery is a type of slavery and sin. Israel's slavery was material. The taskmakers, the bricks, the fields, and whatever else they were accountable to do could be seen and touched. A sinner's slavery is spiritual. It can't be seen, We can see the effects of it a lot of times, but we can't see exactly what's going on. This is why Jesus said there in John, whosoever committeth sin is a servant of sin. Right. We could change that servant to slave, couldn't we? Sure. Whosoever committeth sin is the slave of sin, And we see habits that people have. Smoking's one of them. How smoking, they've got to have that cigarette. They've got to have that cigarette. It becomes a habit to reach up there and put a cigarette in their mouth and to smoke. Even if they're not even thinking about it, they will do that. I talked to a man that smoked for years, and he cold turkeyed it. He just decided one day he was going to do without, and it had been several years. And I asked him, of course, first question I asked him was, do you feel better? Oh, yes, I feel a lot better. I can breathe good. I can, yes, it helps me, that way. I says, well, what do you is there anything that you think back to it? He says, yeah. He says, I still catch myself reaching in my pocket, and there's nothing there, to get a cigarette. He had been doing that so many times that it just becomes a habit, Even when he really didn't even need a cigarette, he was reaching in there and lighting one up, And that's what sin does. Let's take habits like that and turn them around and make reading a Bible a habit. Sure. That's what really, I like to point to, is to do something like that and make it a habit to serve God, and we'll be a lot better off. We'll be a whole lot better off. We have the emphasis there. The junior emphasis is very short there. Things have changed a lot since the Israelites entered Egypt. That's the junior emphasis. So, but you get to thinking about it, and yep, it has changed a lot. Let's go on into our reading there, Exodus 1 and 7. And the children of Israel was fruitful and increased abundantly and multiplied and waxed exceeding mighty, and the land was full with them. Now there arose up a new king over Egypt, which kneweth not Joseph. And he said unto his people, Behold, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come on, let us deal wisely with them, lest they multiply. And it come to pass that when they falleth out any war, they join also unto our enemies and fight against us, and so get them up out of the land. So the Pharaoh, which he calls him king here, but it is Pharaoh of Egypt. It was a new Pharaoh. It was one that did not know Joseph. Remember, the one that went down there knew Joseph, knew who Joseph was, but this is almost 400 years later. So, a lot has happened. Yeah, they could probably look back in the history book and say, oh yeah, I remember when, I remember studying this when Joseph delivered or took care of Egypt, and how the people all came down, and how his family all came down and all. But this guy had no concern of what history or anything was here. He had a problem here. He looks out across his kingdom there, and here these Israelites are multiplying like grasshoppers, I guess you might say. These are not really Egyptian people. These are a different people. And we have a problem if we would happen to get in war, because this multitude of people that live in here in Goshen might conspire with our enemies and, and overthrow us or something, So we've got to do something. The Egyptians were friendly to them at first. However, the friendly king who had been kind died, and another Egyptian or Pharaoh became king of Egypt. He saw the Israelites were many and strong. He was afraid they might fight against Egypt and leave the country. Then they would not work for the Egyptians anymore. They were getting good free labor. And a country to be economically sufficient, they have to have labor, don't they? They have to have labor. Well, boy, there was their labor part. That was answered. That they didn't have any problem there. But they had other problems that they could see might arise if things wasn't taken care of. Then they would not work for the Egyptians anymore. He wanted to keep them from doing this. This new Pharaoh knew not Joseph and his uprightness, his power with God, and his wisdom in handling national problems. He had no idea. He had no idea. They are now in bondage as servants or slaves. And we can take this as a type of the bondage of sin. We can take this as bondage of sin. Being in Egypt there, it was like being under the bondage of sin. And if we will think back to when we were in sin, we thought, that we was having a good time. Yeah, we thought everything was going pretty good until a problem came up, and then, what am I going to do now? And maybe that problem would kind of get solved and everything, and it was back to fun and games and everything. But problems keeps coming up and keeps coming up, and problems keeps coming up. And when you're not following God, you have nowhere to turn to. And these people were in dire straits, so to speak. They had nowhere to turn to. They were here in bondage. They couldn't break away from bondage. If they would try and break away from bondage, what would happen? The Egyptian would go after them, slaughter them, make an example of them to the rest of the Israelites. And, they were right there And they had no freedom, no liberties, no nothing. Slavery is bondage. Subjection is under the authority or control of another. And that's what they were. Lack of liberty. Liberty is freedom or release from slavery. But they had the lack of it. They had none of it. And what they were wanting more than anything was emancipation, which is to set free or release from bondage. You know, I can imagine that they did their work during the day, and then of a night as they gathered together, you know, as they came home and went to their houses, you know, when is God going to deliver us from this bondage, you know? And they looked for a time that they could be free. And a lot of people never was free. They lived their whole life. In the 400 years that they were in slavery, why, there was people that was born in slavery and lived to an old age and died in slavery. And, you know, and they looked for that. Their anticipation was emancipation and liberty, being free. But you know, liberty has its limits, though. Liberty has its limits, you know. You know, God says that we're set at liberty to serve Him. Okay, that has practically no limits to serve Him. We serve Him as to the best of our ability. But you know, it's like, but the limits then comes as to what are we restricted to, you know. Where are we restricted to? You know, if say you're working for someone and he says, okay, you have liberty on this floor, you know, but you know, you're restricted to the floor above or the floor below, you know. You have liberty on this floor, but you know, it's kind of off limits. Well, you know, sin is off limits to us. You know, God says you're at liberty as long as you're doing right. But then when you get close to sin, stay away from that. And so we want to be free. And the best way to be free is let God be our guide. Let God be our leader. Let God be our taskmaster. And He is a just taskmaster, very much unlike Satan, because just completely the opposite. Because Satan is a harsh, rough, don't care taskmaster is what he is. Let's go to verse 11 there. Therefore they did set over them taskmasters to afflict them with their burdens. And they built for Pharaoh treasure cities. And I'm not even going to try to pronounce them. If somebody wanted to pronounce them, I wish you would. Okay. All right. They set over these Israelites people to make sure that they will do the work. And you know, these people didn't just say, oh, now come on, you know, come on. They carried whips with them. I can see them that they had whips. And if you wasn't doing your job, or you got whipped for it. If you wasn't doing enough of your job, you got whipped for it. If they just didn't think you were doing enough, you got whipped for it. And so, you know, what did these lives mean to the Egyptians? Nothing. And that's the same way it is with the devil. Your life means nothing to you, to the devil. your life means nothing to the devil. The quicker that he can get you out of the world in an unsaved condition, that's one soul he has won. Sure. And it means nothing. But God's completely different. God loved us so much that he gave his son so that he could be able to have us back in the right relationship with him. And the devil he's not interested in a relationship with you. He just wants to catch your soul. That's what he wants to do. He just sets traps and snares. Now, God don't do that. God does not set traps and snares. There could be a way that God could force you to serve him if he wanted to. He could force you to serve him. But what would he have? Same thing as the angels is what he would have. He's already got a multitude of people like that, You might say people or, heavenly beings or whatever you want to say. But, he wants us to come willingly to him. And that's the difference between him and Satan. Let's look at verse 12. But the more they afflicted them, this is talking about the Egyptians afflicting the Israelites, the more they multiplied and grew, the Israelites. And they were grieved because of the children of Israel. And the Egyptian made the children of Israel to serve with rigor. Am I pronouncing that word right? And they made their lives bitter with hard bondage. It wasn't bondage. It wasn't just enough to be in bondage, but it was hard bondage. In mortar and in brick and in all manner of service in the field. All their services wherein they made them serve was with rigor. Stout, wrong. Just powerful. Just get all they could get out of a person. That's what they was trying to do. How would you like to work for a boss like that? Some people do. Some people have to. And, bosses has to answer to people above them also. And, in this day and age, it seems like that a company tries to get the most work out of a person with as little employment as they can, because that makes the bottom line look a lot better. And but when these people are in slavery here, they were required the same thing. Get as much out of them as you can. Get it built as fast as we can get it built. We like to, whenever a road's all tore up, and we have to travel that road a lot, we want that road built as fast as possible, don't we? But these people out here are just working their heads off, trying to get the road built, and here we are, boy, that should have been built a month ago, we might think, and, here they are. Well, give us time. And, are we trying to be a taskmaster to them? Well, no, we just want comfort for ourselves. That's really what it is, And, but this was real here. This was real, where they hard work as slaves. Hard work. And they weren't rewarded for their work that they done. Oh yeah, they got their meal and they had a place to stay, but if you worked harder, you didn't get more. I doubt whether you got your share and that's it. But if you didn't work hard enough, it was taken away then, probably. It could have been. The new Pharaoh's first plan was to set over them taskmasters, making sure that they do the work. And men to oversee the work of the Israelites. And these taskmasters, they probably had their work cut out to make sure that that everyone that they were over worked in a uniform way, so that the most can be produced, or the most can be taken care of because there was probably people over them then also, just like in our work today. It's the same way. They come to them taskmasters and, hey, how come this isn't built? You know, you need to get your people together and get them going. You know, and of course the next day, all right, I'm expecting more out of you, but we gave you everything we had. You know, well, I don't care. We got to get more out of you. And so, you know, slavery is not a pretty picture. I'm trying to paint that slavery is not a pretty picture, and being in sin to Satan is even worse.
That's right.
It's even worse. That's what I'm trying to paint a picture of. They were to afflict them with their burdens, to make them suffer. Why? To kill some of them off. See? It didn't matter that they lost lives because they were multiplying anyway. So, you know, the more that they could kill off that way, why, you know.
Also to destroy their will.
Break them down.
That's right.
Break their will down. Yeah. So that they wouldn't try to escape.
Exactly.
They made them serve with rigor, very hard work. The Israelites built cities. They worked in the fields. And you know, when I always thought of the Egyptians being taskmasters over the Israelites, making brick, and we'll run into that where that was part of it, but not every person made a brick. You know, there was fields that had to be worked, and probably cattle had to be shepherded, and or sheep had to be shepherded, and cattle had to be raised. So, you know, just whatever was needed. You know, hey, you're going to be doing this today. You know, and you had no say. They built cities, worked in fields. They lived with. Their lives were bitter with hard bondage. They were slaves and could not do as they wished, but only as they were told. The picture is getting plainer how the devil treats us, ain't it? It's the same way. We can't do what we want to do when we're under the bondage of sin. We can't do what we want to do. It's impossible. Nevertheless, the plan did not work. Still the Israelites multiplied and grew. God was with them. How can God be with us when we have to do what we're doing here? You know, that might have been a question that a lot of the Israelites might have asked. How can God be with us? You know, is this God's will that we be here? You know, there was probably a lot of questions asked at night, husbands and wives asking each other, you know, because the husband probably had to go one place, the wife had to go another place, and they come at night and come home to eat supper, and you know, there was probably some communication between the two. And how'd your day go? You know, that's one of the first things I ask the wife when she gets home. How'd your day go? And you know, oh, it went fairly well, or oh, we had a terrible day today, or you know, and you know, I'm concerned though, you know. Well, I hope tomorrow goes better, you know. And but you know, these people didn't have a choice. They knew what their next day was going to be. Let's go to verse 15. And the king of Egypt spake, which was the Pharaoh, spake to the Hebrews midwives, of which the name of one was, and the name of the other. Okay, and he said, when ye do the office of a midwife to the Egyptian woman, and see them upon the stools, if it be a son, then ye shall kill him, but if it be a daughter, then she shall live. Wow. The Egyptians telling Hebrew women, that's the way you need to work when it comes to the Hebrew childbearers. Kill the boys. Kill the boys. Keep the girls. You know. do you see how America is? They don't even let them be born. They want to kill them before they're born. You know, was this pleasing to God that these Egyptian or that these Hebrew women was told that the Egyptians wanted them to do that? But the midwives feared God and did not as the king of Egypt commanded them, but saved the men children alive. Thank God that the midwives listened to God. You know, if we could just get the abortion doctors to listen to God, this country would be a little different. Be a lot different. It'd be a lot different. But, you know, this wasn't pleasing. This was not pleasing. And the midwives knew that. How did they know that? You know, if we get rid of these little babies, we know that they'll be all right with God. They'll go to heaven. You know, they'll be all right with God. But God said, no, that's not right. That's not right. And so they won't have to be raised in slavery, you know. You know, you can conjure up all kinds of reasons why they could have followed the king, followed the Pharaoh. There was many reasons why they could have conjured up all kinds of reasons, but what they do, they focused on God. They focused on God, and God knew that wasn't right. They knew that God was telling them that wasn't right. That's where we look at verse 22. And Pharaoh charged all his people, saying, every son that is born ye shall cast into the river, and every daughter ye shall save alive. Well, first of all, he told them to kill the boy babies. Pharaoh's next plan was to kill the Egyptian boy babies that were born. He ordered the midwives or nurses to do this. However, they feared God. They were Israelites, descendants of Abraham, and they knew God. How did they know that? You know, the Bible wasn't written, but Abraham passed it to Isaac. Isaac passed it to Jacob. Jacob passed it to Joseph and his 12 brothers, or 11 brothers, you know, and so on and so on and so on down the line. And that's how they knew that. They knew it'd be wrong to kill the babies, and they did not do it. Therefore, Pharaoh had to go to a second plan then. And he told to cast the boys in the river. Pharaoh, if the midwives would not kill the babies, maybe the rest of the people would. You know. Do you reckon this river, do you think that this river had maybe crocodiles in it? It's probably the Nile River, don't you reckon? And it might have had crocodiles in it. You know, and of course, if you're going to throw a baby in a river, they're going to probably drown even if there's not any animals or anything. But you know, there's a lot of things out there that can harm a baby that's live, moving around, you know. And, you know, there's not many of them going to survive when you throw them in the Nile River. He ordered them to cast into the river every son born. How terrible. What will happen? Will Pharaoh's plan work? And you know, sin, one thing about it, everybody has experienced sin. Everybody has experienced sin, but not everybody has experienced being free from sin. You know, and you know, we as Christians can understand what sin is because we've been in sin. You know, back in the 1840s and 1850s and early 1860s, African Americans knew what slavery was like. You ask any African American, you know, what is slavery like? White people could say, oh yeah, I know what slavery's like. No, they really don't. You know, they might have been a slave owner, but they don't know what it's really like, you know. They're free, you know. African Americans was slaves. And, you know, until you actually have been there, yeah, you might think you know what it's like, but, you know, until you're actually there and experience. These people knew what they were experiencing. They knew what was going on. We as Christians know what slavery, spiritual slavery, is like because we've been there before. We as Christians knows what it's like to be free from slavery. The African Americans knew what it was like to be free from slavery after 1865 also, which I have already explained. It wasn't being the real free. They still had problems to deal with. You know, we might have problems being Christian. Being a Christian, problems will arise. Things will arise, but we have someone we can take it to. We have Christ that we can take our problems to. You know, when we're in sin, we don't have a person. We don't have somebody that we can take our problems to. You know, we've got to deal with them. Satan don't care. God is not our master. But, you know, that's when we can turn everything over to God, Dan, and experience a life that is far wonderful, more wonderful than what you can even imagine. Far more wonderful than what we can even imagine. I've got some questions here that I want to rehash here. They're found in the Junior Quarterly. I thought it was some pretty good questions here. What did Pharaoh tell the midwives to do? Well, I think we just studied that. To kill the boy babies and keep the girl babies is what it was to do. How was they to kill them boy babies? He didn't say, did it? Just any way to get rid of them. You know, if it took bashing them over the head, you know, if it took drowning them, if it took strangling them. You know, I'm painting a pretty ugly picture. But you know, abortion is not a pretty picture either. Tore apart, limb by limb. You know, can you imagine? Can you imagine? That's horrible. And we, in 2000 and 2018, and, you know, it looked like we'd be a little smarter than that. But, you know, that's what we're doing here in America. It's terrible. It's terrible. How much longer is God going to allow this to happen? Okay, now, the question was, how did Pharaoh tell the midwives to do? How did they obey? Well, they seen God. They listened to God. They were told what God expected of them from generation to generation to generation until it was them. And you know, are you sure that everything was relayed to us the way it was relayed to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob? You know, that might have been a question that might have entered the midwife's mind at that time, but they still knew that, yes, I believe that did not get twisted up anyway. God is in this for some reason. God is allowing this for some reason to happen. And how did they obey? Well, they didn't. They disobeyed, really, the Pharaoh by letting them stay alive, and used an excuse of some kind of well, by the time we got there, it was already born, you know. what are we supposed to do, you know? So, you know, smarter than people in the year 2000 now, it seems like, you know. All right, what new plan, this is another question, what new plan did Pharaoh have for killing the boy babies? Have the people to do it. The midwives won't do it, so let the people do it by casting them into the river. And he was hoping that that would solve their problem then. Okay, we're going to be studying next Sunday the birth of Moses. Another question that came up, why is a sinner a slave? Why is a sinner a slave? Well, it's like I said, it's at first, slavery is bondage. Being under subjection to someone is bondage, is what it is. Lack of liberty. Not having the liberty that you have. And you know, why are we in slavery? Because we follow Satan. And when we follow Satan, Satan's going to keep us under bondage as long as he can. But we have a breakaway, and that's through Jesus Christ. That's through Jesus Christ. And when we have, when we can bring all things to Him, bring our sins to Him, come as we are. You know, we don't have to get better to come to Jesus. You know, some people says, well, I can't come to Jesus, I'll have to get better. No, come as you are. Come as you are. You can't get better. Yes.
That usually goes along with the sinner, though.
Yes.
I know.
Yeah.
Been there, and I know I'm not the only one.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I just get them.
Sinner is sometimes blinded to the fact that he has to be better to come to God. But God says, come as you are. Come as you are. Yes, you're in bonds. You have habits that cannot be broken unless it's through me. You want to do things that you can't do. You can't do things that you want to do. And, you know, come to me. Turn it all over to me. And when we do, life becomes worth living. Amen. Life becomes worth living. Our next lesson is the birth of Moses. So we'll look into this next week and see what we can get out of that. And so I'll leave that with you then.